Hey, welcome to another edition of Humble Theology. My name is John, and we are still in the book of Revelation. Today we're in chapter 12. We've already done the 7 churches, the 7 seals, and the 7 trumpets, and we've had different interludes in between. But now we're changing gears a little bit in chapter 12, and let's go ahead and just read it, and then we'll discuss it a little bit, or I'll discuss it. You're not here, but you're listening to me. Thank you. Appreciate that. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Anyway, chapter 12 says, "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now," verse 7, "now war rose out in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have been conquered, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they love not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea! For the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." 13. "And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. And the woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, a times, and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of its mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon has poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea." So that's the end of chapter 12, or that's all of chapter 12. But let's break it down a little bit as we look at some of the imagery here. So, if you wanted to summarize all of chapter 12, you have a repetition of one thing: Jesus wins. And if you had a second point, the devil always loses. And again, this is a letter to 7 churches, or holistically as a circle, all the churches. And all the churches are to understand this point. Satan loses. So what's particular about the 7 churches? They're called out for any type of compromise that they have with sin in the world, whether that's false teaching, false associations with satanic things, whatever it might be. They're to flee those things because the end of Satan is always near. We see judgments all the time, and they should always remind us of his end and the end of evil, the end of all things bad. And so, hey, so don't be into those things. Don't go down with them. Set yourself apart. So what is chapter 12 then trying to show us in images? A lot of imagery here, a lot of it dealing with just the history of the church, God's people in general. A great sign, great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed the sun, moon, stars under her feet, and she's about to give birth. 12 stars. This sounds a lot like 12 sons, 12 tribes. Who is this, bride of Christ? Who is this woman? It's Israel. In the Old Testament, we could say the Old Testament church, the Old Testament people of God, bringing forth Christ. And as he's about to come, all this turmoil throughout Israel's history, the birth pains of waiting for, and finally then giving birth to Christ. Satan is constantly hounding this woman, this church, ready to devour this child. That's pretty much the whole Old Testament focus, right? How do we keep the child from coming? How do we destroy the lineage of this woman, of this tribe, of these people, so that this child does not come? But he does come, and he's caught up to heaven. That's a huge summary, right? Jesus comes, his ministry, his death, burial, resurrection, and up to heaven. So everything about Jesus' life, shrunk down to this one little thing about him being born and caught up to heaven. And then she's left on earth to flee from this dragon. Okay, when does that happen? After his ascension, he's caught up to heaven. She's supposed to endure 1,260 days. Well, we keep hearing about this, don't we? The 3.5 years. The 3.5 years is her time. When did that start, according to this? Upon Christ's ascension. She's going to be in the wilderness, in this place prepared by God to be nourished, to be taken care of for this time frame. Well, then we get a little bit of backstory, don't we? It's not like the dragon goes back up to heaven. Well, I missed out on her, so I guess I'll go back up to heaven and figure things out. No. The backstory, so still chapter 12, we look at verses 7 to 12, and we kind of have the backstory. So Michael fighting with Satan and his angels, and obviously, there again, Jesus and his side wins. The devil is losing again. But what does he typically do when he loses? He takes others down with him. It says 1/3 of the stars have fallen down to heaven with him. And what does he do? Well, because I couldn't get him, well, I'm going to go after the woman. The praise here in heaven is that the accuser of God's people has been cast down. But then there's a woe pronounced in verse 12. Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath. So what is he looking to do? Well, looking to take more people down with him. He took different angels down with him, and whatever that revolt was that Michael and other angels put down. But now we see that he's back. This is when he appeared basically on the earth. Don't know if it's directly referring to his instance in the garden with Adam and Eve. It doesn't sound like it. He's been cast down prior to that. So the period here again is like backstory, because we've already seen, well, he's already been on the earth chasing the woman who was about to give birth. And if the 12 tribes is an allusion to Israel as God's people, God's church, God's bride, well, then he's already been here. So it's not, like I said, like there was this thing with the woman, gave birth, went back up to heaven, and he's cast down again. It's like, backstory. He was cast down first, and then kind of you could say 1 through 6 happened, and 13 is picking up back on verse 6. So 13 then, when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. Well, this one of my things in dispensational, I go with covenant theology. God has one covenant people throughout all ages. The saved, salvation is the same in every age. So even in the Old Testament to the New Testament, if you're saved, you're saved. It's always by faith. It's always by God's grace. It's always unto the election of God, and we're always God's people. It's only within dispensationalism that you cut or bifurcate the Old Testament and the New Testament, say, no, Israel was one people. The New Testament church is a totally different people, and he will come again to deal with his bride. Israel, so to say, is almost if he has two brides. He'll deal with Israel as his people after the church is out of here. It's like, well, but here in this passage, we only ever have this one mother, the woman who bears Christ. Okay, so if she's the 12 stars in Israel in the Old Testament, 13 to the end of chapter 12 is clearly New Testament reference. So, because pursuing the woman who had given birth to the male child, well, if that's Old Testament Israel as the church, okay, let's hold that for a minute. The woman was given 2 wings of great eagle, might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, place where she had nourished for this times and half a time. So again, the 3.5 years. There's this idea of a flood trying to swallow the woman up. So all this turmoil, and yet it doesn't hurt her. She's able to escape, and the dragon becomes furious, and he goes off. It says to make war on the rest of her offspring. Who would that be? Well, who follows after Israel? Well, the church. But yet it still says of her offspring. Who are these people that keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus? So isn't that us, the same people then? Clearly we are not Israelites in the physical sense, but in this spiritual picture of the woman, of the tribe, of the people that gave birth to Christ, has now also, are not we as Christians those who follow the commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus? That would have to be us. So again, a delineation from Old Testament church to New Testament church, because it's one people. We are God's people, God's chosen people in any age. Now again, it may have started out as a particular sort of nationality, but we've seen all nations have come into Israel throughout the Old Testament. People are accepted in, although they're not natural born, and yet here we have in the New Testament, especially through Romans and Galatians and other places, the testimony that it's the spiritual children of Abraham that have always been God's people. So I don't want to detract from the Revelation passage here, but I just want to get that concept across, that if you follow here in chapter 12 who this woman is that gave birth to Christ, it's naturally providing us, John is interpreting and giving us a one-to-one vision of, hey, look, this woman, her offspring, they're one and the same people. Again, following the commandments of God and holding to the testimony of Jesus. How do we keep the commandments of God? Well, we keep them as best we can. We keep them in Christ. We are righteous through Him. We have our righteousness via Him through His blood. That's how we're covered. That's whose righteousness we have. We have no righteousness in and of ourselves. And yet we, as His children, are to keep the commands of our Father. We are to be the new people He has called us to be. We are to conform ourselves to His image. What does His image look like? Well, perfect righteousness. We're to be working on that. Again, that's all. I don't want to keep going down this one path, beat it to death. But that's our lesson today from Revelations chapter 12, the history of the church through the Old and New Testaments, the fall of Satan, and simply put, Jesus keeps winning, Satan keeps losing. That's it. God bless. Hope you have a great week, and wish you well. God bless. Take care.